My sister pretended to be terminally ill to steal my inheritance and wedding fund, so I exposed her lies at her fake funeral. My name is Thomas, and I never imagined that my own sister would fake a terminal illness to manipulate our entire family and steal everything that belonged to me. Caroline and I were born just minutes apart, but we couldn't have been more different. While I was always the responsible, studious twin who followed rules and worked hard for everything I achieved, Caroline was the dramatic one who craved attention and seemed to believe the world owed her something special. Our parents, Margaret and William, always tried to treat us equally, but Caroline had a way of making everything about herself that often left me feeling invisible. Growing up, Caroline was constantly creating drama and emergencies that required our parents' immediate attention. She would claim to be sick when she had tests at school, fake injuries to get out of chores, and create elaborate stories about being bullied or mistreated to gain sympathy. Our parents always believed her because they couldn't imagine that their daughter would lie about such serious things, and I learned early on that speaking up about Caroline's lies would only make me look jealous and petty. This pattern continued into our 20s, but the stakes became much higher as we became adults with real responsibilities and relationships. Caroline struggled to hold down jobs and maintain relationships because her need for constant drama and attention eventually wore people out. Meanwhile, I worked steadily as an engineer, saved money responsibly, and built a stable life with my fiancée Sarah, whom I planned to marry after 3 years of dating. Our grandmother, who we called Nana Rose, had always been very close to both Caroline and me. She was our father's mother, a sweet woman who had worked hard her entire life and had managed to save a considerable amount of money despite never being wealthy. Nana Rose lived in her own small house and was fiercely independent, but as she aged, she began talking about her will and what would happen to her savings and property after she passed away. Nana Rose had always been fair with Caroline and me, treating us equally and making it clear that she loved us both deeply. She had told us many times that she planned to split her inheritance equally between us, which would give each of us around $150,000 plus half of the value of her house. For me, this inheritance represented the ability to pay for my wedding to Sarah and potentially put a down payment on our first home together. When Caroline was 26, she started complaining about feeling tired and having headaches. At first, our family assumed she was just stressed from her latest job or relationship drama, but Caroline insisted that something was seriously wrong with her health. She went to several doctors and had various tests done, always returning with vague reports about needing more tests or waiting for results. Over the course of several months, Caroline's reported symptoms became more severe and specific. She claimed to be experiencing dizzy spells, unexplained weight loss, and severe fatigue that made it difficult for her to work. She started missing family gatherings because she was too sick to attend, and when she did show up, she looked pale and weak, often needing to sit down or leave early because she wasn't feeling well. Our parents were increasingly worried about Caroline's health, especially when she told them that doctors were concerned about some abnormalities in her blood work and wanted to do more extensive testing. Caroline always seemed to have appointments with specialists and was constantly going in for scans, biopsies, and consultations. She would share updates about her medical journey with the family, but the information was always frustratingly vague and incomplete. The devastating news came during a family dinner at our parents' house about 18 months after Caroline's symptoms had started. She arrived looking thinner and more fragile than ever, and she asked us all to sit down because she had something important to tell us. With tears streaming down her face, Caroline announced that she had been diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer that was aggressive and had a very poor prognosis. Our family was completely shattered by this news. Caroline explained that the doctors had found multiple tumors in her brain and that traditional treatments like chemotherapy and radiation were unlikely to be effective. She said the oncologist had given her between 6 months and 2 years to live, depending on how quickly the cancer progressed. Our parents were inconsolable, and even I was devastated by the thought of losing my sister, despite all our past conflicts. Caroline handled the news with what seemed like remarkable courage and grace. She talked about wanting to make the most of whatever time she had left and about not wanting to burden the family with her illness. She said she was going to stop working and focus on spending quality time with the people she loved while she still felt well enough to enjoy life. Nana Rose was particularly heartbroken by Caroline's diagnosis because she adored both of her grandchildren and couldn't bear the thought of losing Caroline so young. She immediately began talking about changing her will to ensure that Caroline would be able to enjoy her inheritance while she was still alive. Nana Rose felt that it would be cruel to make Caroline wait for money that could help her live more comfortably during her final months or years. Within a few weeks of Caroline's announcement, Nana Rose had consulted with her lawyer and revised her will to leave Caroline the majority of her estate. Instead of splitting everything equally between Caroline and me, the new will gave Caroline $200,000 plus the house, while I would receive only $50,000. Nana Rose explained to me that she still loved me just as much, but that Caroline needed the money more because of her circumstances, and she hoped I would understand. I was hurt by this decision, not because I felt entitled to Nana Rose's money, but because it felt unfair that Caroline's illness should completely change our grandmother's final wishes. However, I couldn't bring myself to argue with a dying woman about her will, and I certainly couldn't complain about my sister receiving more money when she was supposedly dying of cancer. I told Nana Rose that I understood her reasoning and that I wanted Caroline to have whatever would make her remaining time more comfortable. Caroline used her diagnosis to extract sympathy and financial support from everyone in our extended family. Aunts and uncles who had never been particularly close to us suddenly started sending her money and gifts. Family friends organized fundraisers to help with her medical expenses, even though Caroline claimed that her insurance was covering most of her treatments. She received thousands of dollars in donations from people who wanted to help her fight cancer or enjoy her remaining time. Our parents completely reorganized their lives around Caroline's illness. They drove her to supposed medical appointments, brought her meals when she claimed to be too weak to cook, and basically waited on her hand and foot. They also started giving her money regularly to help with living expenses since she was no longer working, and they paid for expensive alternative treatments that Caroline claimed might help slow the progression of her cancer. Meanwhile, my own life was being affected by Caroline's illness in ways that were causing serious strain in my relationship with Sarah. We had been planning our wedding for over a year, but Caroline's diagnosis made it seem inappropriate to celebrate or spend money on a big party when she was dying. Our parents suggested that we should postpone the wedding until after Caroline passed away, or at least scale it back significantly out of respect for what the family was going through. Sarah was understanding about the situation, but she was also frustrated that our entire relationship seemed to be on hold because of Caroline's illness. We had already put deposits down on vendors and sent save-the-date cards to guests, but the emotional and financial focus of our family had shifted completely to Caroline's care. I found myself spending less time with Sarah and more time helping my parents care for Caroline, which was putting a strain on our engagement. Caroline's condition seemed to fluctuate in ways that were convenient for whatever she wanted to do or avoid. She would be too sick to attend family obligations or work responsibilities, but then she would feel well enough to go shopping or out to dinner with friends. When questioned about these inconsistencies, Caroline would explain that cancer was unpredictable and that she was trying to enjoy good days when she had them. As Caroline's supposed condition progressed, she started talking about wanting to travel and see the world while she still could. She convinced our parents to pay for expensive trips to Europe and Hawaii, claiming that experiencing these places was on her bucket list and that the memories would bring comfort to the family after she was gone. She also moved out of her small apartment and into a much nicer place, saying that she wanted to live comfortably during her final months. About 6 months into Caroline's diagnosis, I started noticing some things that didn't quite add up. Caroline claimed to be undergoing chemotherapy treatments that should have caused her to lose her hair, but her hair remained thick and healthy throughout her supposed treatment. When I asked her about this, she said that she was taking experimental drugs that didn't cause hair loss, but she was always vague about the details of her treatment. I also noticed that Caroline never seemed to have the typical side effects that cancer patients experience. She wasn't nauseous, didn't have mouth sores or extreme fatigue, and didn't seem to be losing weight in the dramatic way that cancer patients usually do. When she claimed to be losing weight, it seemed like normal dieting rather than the muscle wasting that accompanies serious illness. The most suspicious thing was that Caroline would never let anyone accompany her to her medical appointments. She always insisted on going alone, claiming that she didn't want to burden anyone else or that the appointments were too depressing for family members to witness. When our parents offered to drive her or sit in waiting rooms for support, Caroline would become emotional and insist that she needed to handle this part of her journey independently. I started doing research about Caroline's supposed type of brain cancer and learned that patients with her diagnosis typically experience severe neurological symptoms that Caroline never seemed to have. Brain cancer patients often have seizures, vision problems, speech difficulties, and cognitive impairment, but Caroline remained articulate and mentally sharp throughout her supposed illness. The more I learned about her alleged condition, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. My suspicions reached a breaking point when I decided to follow Caroline to one of her supposed chemotherapy appointments. I took a day off work and waited outside her apartment building until she left for what she had told our parents was an important treatment session. Instead of going to the cancer center where she claimed to be receiving treatment, Caroline drove to a shopping mall and spent the day browsing stores and having lunch with a friend. I was stunned and furious as I watched Caroline enjoy a normal, healthy day while our entire family was arranging their lives around her supposed terminal illness. I followed her for several more appointments over the next few weeks and discovered that she was never actually going to medical facilities. Instead, she would go shopping, meet friends for coffee, or sometimes just sit in parks reading books while she was supposed to be receiving life-saving treatments. Convinced that Caroline was faking her entire illness, I decided to hire a private investigator to gather evidence of her deception. I knew that accusing her of lying about cancer would require absolute proof, because the accusation was so serious that no one would believe me without overwhelming evidence. The private investigator was able to document Caroline's activities during her supposed treatment times and also discover that she had never actually been a patient at any of the cancer centers she claimed to be visiting. The investigation revealed that Caroline had been using fake medical documents and forged letters from doctors to convince our family that she was receiving treatment. She had created an elaborate fiction involving multiple specialists and treatment facilities, complete with fake appointment cards and treatment schedules. Caroline had even researched cancer symptoms and treatments extensively so that she could speak convincingly about her supposed condition. The most shocking discovery was that Caroline had been using her fake illness to apply for various forms of financial assistance and disability benefits that she wasn't entitled to receive. She had filed fraudulent insurance claims and had even set up online fundraising accounts where strangers donated money to help with her medical expenses. The total amount of money Caroline had obtained through her deception was over $300,000, including the inheritance money from Nana Rose and donations from family and strangers. Armed with this evidence, I knew I had to expose Caroline's lies, but I also knew that the revelation would devastate our family and destroy relationships that might never be repaired. Our parents had spent almost 2 years grieving for their dying daughter and had reorganized their entire lives around caring for her. Nana Rose had changed her will and was preparing to lose her granddaughter. The emotional damage that Caroline's deception had caused was incalculable. I decided that the best way to expose Caroline's lies would be to wait for a moment when the entire family was together and present the evidence in a way that would make denial impossible. Caroline had been talking about her condition worsening and had recently told our parents that her doctors thought she only had a few months left to live. She was planning what she called a living funeral, where family and friends could say goodbye to her while she was still conscious and able to hear their tributes. The living funeral was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at our parents' house, with about 50 family members and friends invited to share memories and say their final goodbyes to Caroline. She had planned the event down to the smallest detail, including asking people to wear bright colors instead of black and requesting that the gathering be a celebration of her life rather than a mourning of her death. Caroline looked appropriately frail and emotional as guests arrived for her living funeral. She had lost some weight and was wearing minimal makeup to enhance her supposedly sickly appearance. She moved slowly and spoke softly, playing the role of a dying woman with remarkable dedication. Our parents were barely holding themselves together, and several relatives were already crying before the ceremony even began. As the gathering began, people started sharing stories about Caroline and expressing their love and admiration for how bravely she was facing her illness. The speeches were heartfelt and emotional, and Caroline responded with tears and gratitude, thanking everyone for making her feel so loved during her final months. The scene was incredibly moving, and I almost felt guilty for what I was about to do. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and told the gathering that I had something very important to share about Caroline's courage and the journey she had been on. I said that I had been investigating Caroline's illness because I wanted to write a tribute to her bravery, and that my research had uncovered some remarkable information about her condition and treatment. I then presented all the evidence of Caroline's deception to the shocked gathering. I showed them photographs of Caroline shopping and socializing during times when she was supposed to be receiving chemotherapy. I presented documentation proving that she had never been a patient at any of the medical facilities she claimed to be visiting. I showed them examples of the forged medical documents and fake insurance claims that Caroline had been using to support her lies. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several people gasped in shock and disbelief, while others demanded to know what kind of sick joke I was playing. Caroline initially tried to maintain her performance, claiming that I was lying and that she couldn't believe I would attack her during such a vulnerable time. But as I continued presenting evidence, including recorded conversations and financial documents, it became impossible for her to deny the truth. Our parents were completely devastated as they realized that they had been manipulated and lied to for almost 2 years. Our mother started crying uncontrollably, while our father became angry and demanded to know how Caroline could have done something so cruel to people who loved her. Nana Rose, who had changed her will specifically to help Caroline, looked completely broken as she understood that her generosity had been exploited through lies. Caroline finally broke down and admitted that she had been faking her illness, but she tried to justify her actions by claiming that she had felt neglected and unloved by the family. She said that pretending to be sick was the only way she could get the attention and care that she had always craved, and that she had never intended for the deception to go as far as it did. She claimed that she had been planning to admit the truth eventually, but that she had gotten trapped in the lie and didn't know how to escape it. The gathering ended in complete chaos, with guests leaving in shock and disgust. Several people demanded that Caroline return the money they had donated to help with her medical expenses, while others threatened to report her fraud to the authorities. Our family was left to deal with the aftermath of Caroline's deception and the realization that she had manipulated all of us for years. The legal consequences for Caroline were swift and severe. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud, including insurance fraud, disability fraud, and theft by deception. The total amount of money she had obtained through her fake illness exceeded $300,000, making her charges serious felonies that could result in significant prison time. She was also required to pay restitution to all the individuals and organizations she had defrauded. Nana Rose immediately changed her will back to its original form, splitting her inheritance equally between Caroline and me. However, she also added a provision that Caroline's portion would be held in trust and used to pay restitution to her victims, meaning that Caroline would receive nothing from the inheritance she had tried to steal through her deception. Our family relationships were permanently damaged by Caroline's lies and manipulation. Our parents struggled to trust her again and felt deeply betrayed by how she had exploited their love and concern. They also felt guilty and embarrassed about how completely they had been fooled by her performance, and they had difficulty facing friends and relatives who had donated money or offered support based on Caroline's lies. Caroline was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in prison for her fraud charges, though she was released after serving 18 months. She was also ordered to complete community service and undergo psychological counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to her elaborate deception. Her criminal record made it difficult for her to find employment, and her reputation in our community was permanently destroyed. The most satisfying part of exposing Caroline's lies wasn't the legal consequences she faced, but watching her lose all the sympathy and attention she had gained through her deception. People who had admired her supposed courage and grace in facing terminal illness now saw her as a manipulative fraud who had exploited their compassion for selfish gain. Caroline had to face the reality that her lies had destroyed her relationships with everyone who had ever cared about her. Sarah and I were finally able to plan our wedding without the shadow of Caroline's fake illness hanging over our celebration. We used the money I received from Nana Rose's inheritance to pay for a beautiful ceremony and reception, and we were able to start our married life without the financial stress that Caroline's deception had caused. Our wedding was a joyful celebration that wasn't overshadowed by fake tragedy or family drama. Looking back, I realized that Caroline's fake illness was just an extreme version of the attention-seeking behavior she had displayed throughout her life. She had always been willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wanted, but faking terminal cancer showed a level of cruelty and selfishness that went beyond anything I had imagined she was capable of. The fact that she was willing to put our elderly grandmother and our parents through years of grief and worry for her own financial gain showed me that Caroline was truly capable of anything. The experience taught our entire family valuable lessons about the importance of verifying dramatic claims and not allowing ourselves to be manipulated by people who exploit our emotions. We learned that love and compassion can make us vulnerable to deception, but that doesn't mean we should stop caring about people who claim to need our help. Instead, we learned to ask for verification and to trust our instincts when something doesn't seem right. Caroline's fake illness also showed me the importance of standing up for the truth, even when it's difficult or painful to expose. I could have remained silent about my suspicions and allowed Caroline to continue her deception, but that would have enabled her to hurt even more people and steal even more money. By gathering evidence and exposing her lies, I was able to protect our family and ensure that Caroline faced consequences for her actions. The most rewarding outcome of this entire experience was seeing our family begin to heal and rebuild trust after Caroline's lies were exposed. Without her constant drama and manipulation, our relationships became more genuine and peaceful. We learned to communicate more directly and honestly with each other, and we developed a stronger appreciation for truth and authenticity in our interactions. Caroline occasionally attempts to contact family members and rebuild relationships, but her efforts are usually met with skepticism and wariness. She has never taken full responsibility for the emotional damage her lies caused, and she continues to minimize her actions and blame others for her problems. Until she demonstrates genuine remorse and changed behavior, most of our family members prefer to keep their distance from her. The fake funeral I exposed turned out to be the perfect metaphor for Caroline's entire deception, an elaborate performance designed to manipulate emotions and extract sympathy from people who genuinely cared about her. By revealing the truth at that moment, I was able to show everyone exactly who Caroline really was and ensure that her lies could never again be used to hurt the people who loved her.